Today, we're going to explore a root cause, one that explains a lot of the grief. You'll learn a way to think about it, which will set you up for greater success with the Agile journey, even if you've already started. And our starting point is this model. I know there are people here who have seen some of my talks before. You would have seen this model. I get a lot of mileage out of this one. This one dates back about 40 years. The official name for it is the logical levels of change. And what it describes is basically how people approach life. It's a structure. The big idea with this model is that what you have at a given level determines the possibilities and what you'll choose at the lower levels. Okay, I'm going to give you two examples. So the first one is professional. This is my identity. This is one of my roles. It's not a role I was born with. I chose it. It fits me. Within that context, there's something I care about. I mean, there's several things I care about. Here's one of them. I want organizations to be effective, humane, and responsible. That's something I pay a lot of attention to and optimize for in my role, as opposed to saying, for instance, I value, a clockwork process and, streamlined workflows. I also believe some things. That means that there are certain things I assume are true and operate accordingly. Here's one of them. There might be some people here who don't actually share this belief with me. I believe that with supportive leadership, most companies can change. I've had to learn to do something in order to pursue this role. One of the things I continue to learn is how to talk so people listen. And now we're getting to the level of, where the rubber meets the road. What are some of the behaviors I do because of what I believe and value and so on? One thing I do is choose my stance. So when I work with clients, I will coach or facilitate or tell or train or consult, and as I think would be best for the situation. So levels at the top determine what's possible at the bottom. The last one is environment. This is the context I put myself in order to do this. My context is of an independent practice. I've been independent for 13 years. I want to give you a personal example as well. And as I do that, please reflect how what I'm sharing somehow reflects what goes on for you, right? Because all of these threads that I describe here, you have them. They may not look exactly like mine, but you have them. So think what yours would be, maybe in a context like this. So again, identity. One of my roles is I'm a parent. My twins are now 19 years old. One thing I've always wanted for them, it's a value, it's high up, is to be lifelong learners. In this context, what do I assume? What do I take for granted? Well, one thing I take for granted is that you need integrated learning, meaning don't study topics or subjects in isolation like they do in some educational systems, but instead put stuff together, integrate it. Okay, well, what do I do about that? I've had to learn something, some capabilities in order to make that happen. So because homeschooling was not in the cards, I've had to study various educational systems, right? So we have the public, we have the private, but even there's lots of variation. Okay, what did I do as a result? Well, for the first 9 years that they were in some type of educational system, they were in a Montessori school. I'm sure some of you are familiar with that. Then in middle school and high school, they were in the IB program. Now, I'm not going to get into the details, but those two, Montessori and IB, if you just look at them surface level, they look very different. They look like they're trying to get different things, but actually they're not. And in fact, they serve very much the same values, which is why they were a good fit for us. So the thing with this model is that it describes everything that we have going on in life. And like the previous example shows, also professionally, both individually and collectively as teams and organizations. So what we're going to do now is expand this model in the context of work. By the way, if you got the handout, you will see that the examples that I gave you are in the handout. So if you'd like to kind of try it for yourselves as well, you can use that later on. Okay, let's expand the model. We're now going to look at the model on the right. So it's fundamentally the same thing, but it's now a little bit bigger and in the context of work. What this model says is that we do work for a reason. You can call it purpose, you can have objectives, that's the top level. And then at the bottom, there is what we actually do, the tangible procedural stuff that we do, the processes, tools, roles, practices, artifacts, all the stuff that goes into getting work done. And what you see in the middle is what I refer to as mindset, and it has 3 elements, 2 of which you just saw. One is what we value, the other one is what we believe. Now, when we're being agile, what do we value and what do we believe? Well, the base model. You know how when you get a car, you can choose the base model? The base model of Agile is the manifesto. And what you see here is language that got updated for the advancements in the last 20 years, but it's fundamentally the same. We want to make a difference frequently. We want to adapt to changes, whether we ask for the changes or not. We want collaboration between the people who do the work and the people who benefit from it. And we want to put people first. What do we believe? Well, We believe a whole bunch of stuff. It fills up an entire page. It's a whole narrative. Here are some of the more impactful beliefs. One is we're not going to foretell the future. Even if we could, we're not going to. Another one, if we have to choose between effective and efficient, and we often do, let's face it, then effective first is better for business. Third, employing human beings, risky business. How do we mitigate that risk? Well, by having them collaborate in self-organizing teams. I want you to think for a moment about what I said there. To a lot of you, especially if you're a coach, it might sound like it's fact, but really, it is not fact. It's a belief. We see lots of evidence. It seems to work out, but it is not fact. It is not provable, which also explains some of the challenges that we have communicating with people who do see other things as fact. Okay, back to the model. I've introduced a layer. It's the layer of principles. So what that means is that there are certain standards that guide how we make choices, how we take actions. Here are examples of Agile principles. These are well known. There's nothing surprising here. There's more, right? There's plenty more. There's actually more than 12, because if you read the manifesto closely, what it calls 12 principles is actually a bit of a mix between principles and beliefs. But regardless, in the 20 years since, we have learned about more principles that we identify as Agile, such as psychological safety, such as servant leadership, things that were not explicit or even mentioned there. So we have a pretty good understanding nowadays of what is considered an Agile principle, and the whole list of them is in the handout. So what do these principles mean? They mean that whenever we engage in anything, again, procedure, some type of tactic, we kind of color them. So for instance, feedback. Feedback is not just holding a demo meeting. We seek feedback all the time in our daily work, not just from customers, sometimes from machines. We write tests, and so on and so forth. Simplicity. Simplicity isn't just how you write user stories. It's also how you do roadmaps, and it's how you do stand-ups, and a whole bunch of stuff. So principles permeate everything that we do. All the elements that you know from Scrum, for instance, were designed from the principles. So it's not just Scrum, it's all the other Agile methods as well. So if we look at the tactical level, which really corresponds to the the hands-on doing, the processes, the tools, artifacts, and so on, we can actually reverse engineer them and see why they were designed the way they were designed. Okay, let's look at an example. Let's take the daily stand-up in the canonical, popular, well-known form. I know the guide doesn't mention it like this anymore. It's fine, but still, most of the world uses it this way. Every day, team gets together, it's the whole team, 10, 15 minutes, they answer those famous 3 questions. Where did this come from? The first question we need to ask is, what's its purpose? Now, there are different explanations to the purpose of the daily stand-up. One that I really like is that it is meant to help us maximize our chances of hitting our immediate objectives. Usually our immediate objectives are, what's in the queue, the sprint goal, stuff like that, beyond the day. Another way to think of the purpose of the stand-up is, how can we maximize the next 24 hours? What's the best thing we can do in the next 24 hours, us as a team? So that's the purpose. It's not the format. This is, first thing about meetings. What's the purpose? Okay, if you have a daily stand-up and it runs well, right, it achieves that purpose regularly. Which of the Agile principles are at play? Let's take a look. One thing you see there is that the team self-organizes, meaning that it's the team members who decide who will pick up what. They don't wait to be told. Okay, that's self-organization. You see collaboration. When people help each other finish stuff or get unstuck, there's transparency, right? We're not trying to hide anything. The team looks at, the full, set of data, the information, the plan, everything's in front of them. There are more here, but I want to point one out in particular, and that is safety. That one is not obvious at all from the description of the meeting. Because think about it. If you want people to be truthful about what they did yesterday, including the goofing off and the getting stuck and the misunderstanding and the I tried and it didn't work, and you want them to be truthful about their blockers, impediments, what's in their way, they have to feel safe to talk. So again, it's about the principles that make this work. It's not so much about the format. Okay, if you have these principles implemented well in the practice, you can legitimately see yourself as, achieving or working towards the Agile values. For instance, in this case, we're clearly putting people first. This is a meeting by the team and for the team. Again, safety, transparency, respect as well, because everybody talks. Very much a case of people first. It allows adaptation. It allows frequent value delivery or enables them. And if your customer or product person or business partner or whoever who kind of shapes the product is there, you can collaborate with them. What we've done here can explain the daily stand-up. We can do this with every Agile practice, tool, role, artifact, and so on. You will have the slide in the handout as well. You can run this exercise with your team, doing exactly what I did here now. You pick a tactic, here are just examples. You ask this question, what's the purpose? When it achieves it, which principles are at play or play out the most? And you can use the handout just as a cheat sheet. And how do these principles implemented by the tactic achieve the Agile values? You're basically sanity checking here. If you have a team where some people are kind of doubtful, why are we doing X and why are we following practice Y? Do this with them. So we can do this to everything, every well-known Agile practice. Back to the matter of mindset. What we've seen so far is that it is important for us to design the way of working, the tactical stuff. But mindset has more significance than that. You do continuous improvement, like in retros, Kaizen events, whatever. What do you choose to improve and where do you take it? You make those choices based on what's important to you, values, what you assume, beliefs, and your operational principles, how you make decisions. There is one more, and that is one that I find that a lot of people don't notice until I kind of call it out. It's what happens when stuff goes wrong and our process, methodology, playbook, guide, whatever is silent. What happens then? For instance, you hold a demo, nobody comes. Or you hold a retro, nobody speaks. What do? You need to respond. You need to respond somehow. How do you respond? Based on what's important to you, what you assume, and your principles. For instance, if what you value is control, you will force people into a meeting. You will force them to talk. If what you value is participation, you will build a collaborative environment that should encourage people to talk. And even that is not the full picture. And this is really, really what we're here for. Every organization that is interested in Agile has some starting points. Now, we're in 2022. The starting points these days are different than they were 20 years ago, when presumably everybody was waterfall. But even organizations along the Agile journey nowadays, if you look at where they are, many are not really there yet. Many are even quite far away, even if they have some Agile implementation. So it's interesting to ask, what is the prevailing mindset in such organizations? Whether they have not started yet, or they recently started, or they started and they got stuck. And the question is not so much, well, do they do Scrum? Do they do stand-ups? That's not it. The question is about agility, values, beliefs, principles. So if you look across such organizations, you're likely to find some variation of these. So these are the traditional values, the stuff that PMI used to teach, that exclusively waterfall and so on. Even in 2022, they are still fairly prevalent. What such organizations value when they get work done is to get stuff right the first time. Sometimes that's implemented as project thinking. Other times it's implemented by thinking a lot ahead of time. They want to be on time and on budget, or otherwise they control for cost and time. They want to make early commitments, right? What will you have by when? And generally, they want to follow industry standards, okay? There are methods that are supposed to work, and there are ways to manage people and ways to manage projects. We should do them. And if they don't exist, we will make our own and stick to them. So that's for values. What do they believe? So something that we often see is this belief that customers know what they want. Now, usually when I mention this in my courses, I encounter some giggles because most participants know that that's not true. But their organizations act as if it's true. In some cases, they substitute customers for the business. In other cases, they substitute customers for product. In other cases, there is no obvious customer. Management tells them. Here's another belief. Putting a plan together is worth it, even if it takes a long time. It's okay to have multiple constraints. And the one that you heard in the introduction bugs me the most is equating people with resources. When an organization operates like this, or I should say operates with these in mind, certain principles prevail. Here's one. Plan the work and work the plan. In plain English, don't move without a plan. Next one. Once you have a plan, try not to change it. That messes us up. We want to keep people busy. In old times where we had human resources to manage, we call this maximizing utilization. Nowadays, we call this fully loading people or keeping them busy, but it's one of the principles. We have expensive people. We want to make sure they're typing. And in terms of how they organize as hub and spokes, meaning that everybody is this spoke on some, imaginary wheel. In other words, they know what to work on because somebody told them. What happens if we bring an agile tactic into an organization that runs like this? Again, let's look at the daily stand-up because that's usually what they definitely implement. Stand-ups have been documented. You can go online, find lots of examples. They're in the books everywhere. But now the question is this: if these are the values and principles that guide everything in this organization, what will happen to the stand-up? How will it run differently? How will its dynamic be different? Well,
it becomes a status report.
Yes, and you just jump to the conclusion. Let's see how we get there. If we plan the work and work the plan, that means that in our daily stand-up, there is a plan that we're looking at. It's usually a sprint plan. It's whatever's on the board, and so on. If we want to limit change, why do we ask people, what are you going to do today? We know the answer, just need to look in the plan. If we want to maximize utilization, then when somebody gets to, let's say, the second question and says, well, I'm not quite sure what I'll work on today because I think I have some free time. We'll take care of that free time. Don't worry about it. In hub and spokes, you would usually see this, and I'm sure a lot of you have, where the participants in the meeting only speak to one person, whoever's leading it. They might be called Scrum Master, they might be called Coach, Manager, Engineering Manager, you name it. But it's not really a discussion among them, okay? They talk to the person leading the meeting because that is the perceived authority. So yes, we get a status meeting, only if we used to have weekly ones, now we have them daily. Yeah, we can repeat this exercise with product backlog. This is what the product backlog is supposed to be, this prioritized list of valuable items that the team might get to, their options, not commitments. You bring this artifact into an environment that operates by these values and principles. And what do? They look at it and they say, well, you took my project plan away, so I don't have anything else. I guess the backlog is it. If it's on the backlog, it's going to get done. And if it's on the backlog, it's not coming off. And somebody owns it. That's the single point of responsibility. It means everything has an owner, a single one. So somebody owns it. So before you know it, you have a project plan with a better term, with a cooler name. And the really sad thing is that we can repeat this exercise for every so-called agile practice. We've done it for 2. We can do this for a 3rd one. Remember this one, pair programming? You can see a couple of nods. That one came up in the extreme programming world. The idea is 2 developers, 1 computer. But what's the idea? It's not 2 developers, 1 computer. The idea, the principle, the intent is to minimize the risk of employing human beings doing complex work. But when you bring this practice to an organization where people equal resources, so meaning they equal the sum of their technical skills, and they should know what they're doing because that's how we hire them, then this is a severe case of underutilization, which is why pair programming has not taken off. Some people still do it. Some people do mob programming. But that's a drop in the bucket. Scrum Master, anyone here who got training should have learned what it says there in green. Servant leader, helping the team succeed as a team, and so on and so forth. But again, if people are effectively resources and we just follow plans, then we need somebody to make sure that we comply. And demo, right? We can do this for demo. We can do this for everything. Now, here's the thing. What I'm showing you is a bit of a black and white comparison. Green and red, but black and white comparison because, no organization is 100% agile and no organization is 100% traditional. But look at what we have here. You can execute the exact same nominal practice, lift it out of a book, website, course, whatever. The choices you make collectively, the choices leaders make, and so on, those invisible, subjective, abstract choices determine what you'll get in terms of the actual practice and therefore the outcomes that you will get. So let's say your current standpoint is, your mindset is, or your organizational mindset is already pretty agile, then it won't look like the red, but it may not also look like the green entirely either. So this gives us a problem. If we bring so-called agile goodness into an organization that has, let's say, a traditional mindset, what happens to those tactics, those practices, is that they get watered down. We get the stuff in red. They don't achieve agility, and we confuse people. If anybody here has ever had to lead an agile makeover, that's most of what I do for my clients, you know how hard that gets. It gets because people legitimately ask, what's going to be different this time? Practices look the same to me, so what's the big idea? But there's another problem. This is actually how most organizations start. They start with the bottom three layers, what I called tactics in the model with the green and purple and blue. Okay. So in some organizations, they would put everybody in scrum teams, and now there's no specs or requirements, it's stories, and they start sprinting. Others will define their own custom approach. They tell the recruiters to source a coach because that's another resource, and so on and so forth. So let's see what the logical level model has to say about this, because I described it to you at the beginning, but I did not describe all of it. For this, we need to look at three kinds of change. What are you trying to change here, or what kind of intervention are you looking for? First kind of change is easy. If your or again, collective mindset is already mostly agile, and all you're doing now is updating some behaviors, that should work nicely, right? For instance, better testing approach, better planning approach, slightly more agile road mapping, things like that, fine. And that works nicely because, again, higher levels determine what's possible under them. You're not creating a misalignment. Of course, though, that's usually not the starting point of agile journeys. So how about the second type of change? Okay, let's say you want to create your change by working hard on changing people's beliefs and values, because that's where Agile lives. The model predicts actually that making a change this high up will cause a real change, because it will cascade down to the tactical levels and it will stick. Problem with this one, of course, that it's much harder to do. It's much harder to change beliefs and values because they're more entrenched. They're more habits, they're more what we're used to doing. So we tried this, but what if we try what you saw in the previous slide in terms of what most organizations do? What if you change at one of these levels in a way that doesn't yet align with the higher ones? You teach people how to do Scrum, for instance, just picking on Scrum because it's popular. You ask them to work in teams and collaborate and write everything like so and reviews and whatever. But the values and beliefs that govern things there are unchanged. What the model predicts is that this might succeed if two conditions apply. One is that the change is seen as positive, and let's say that's the case. But the other one, and that's a difficult one, is that the change is also safe. And therefore, what I know is that you shouldn't count on it succeeding, because in organizations, there's usually not enough safety. There's trouble. There's always trouble with the looming deadlines, and definitely the too many number one priorities, and the promises we made, and the board is watching us, and the pressure from the top. And before you know it, the unchanged values kick in for team members and managers and executives because that's safe for them. It's safer for them to ask you, when will you be done? And you have committed, and all the stuff that you know and want to change from. They do what the organization currently wants, and they stay employed, which really brings us full circle to the title of this talk, because that's how Agile journeys stall or fail. So we've seen how organizations usually start at these lower three levels, but practices alone don't create transformation. They're implementation. And if, like logical level model says, if you implement them with a non-agile mindset, you're not likely to get agility. To create agility, you must attend to the levels that matter. So that's values and beliefs. And you want to implement tactics accordingly. All of this from day one. So don't just change what people do. You want to win hearts and minds, and you work on all of these levels. So in conclusion, organizations don't get to agility because they don't get the agile mindset. How do you get the agile mindset? Well, here are some things in the couple of minutes I have left. Some things that I help leaders with when that's what they want to do. We start with education and awareness. For instance, everything I just told you, right? A lot of people don't know that. We want to create alignment, meaning that how we work should align to what we're trying to accomplish. And base model agile may not be it. Observations, feedback, and coaching. In other words, not telling and controlling. What I'm describing here has a better staying power, but it's slower. In terms of assessing agile maturity, I don't look at velocity. I definitely don't look at process compliance. I definitely don't look for best practices because context matters. What I look for is what people actually do, which principles are at play at what they do, and are those the principles they wanted to have when they started the journey? How consistent are they? How often and how well are they implementing what they said they would do as an agile way of working? Obviously, that implies how we do continuous improvement. And two more things. One is commitment to agility, not to the method. Committed to our success as an organization, committed to us putting people first and putting customers, front and center, things like that, but not attached to Oh, it's going to be story points. Oh, it's going to be Jira. Not about that. And lastly, this whole thing, this agile journey, the responsibility, the stewardship for it needs a home. Whether you have an agile leadership team, a director of agile, a COE, those are all different patterns, pros and cons, but it needs to have a home. It's not something that happens because an executive says so and then runs it off the side of their desk. So you need to have it home, give it some level of authority, otherwise nobody listens, and some budget.